I'm Clemencia Cosentino. Thank you very much for inviting me today. I'm delighted to be here. Right before this presentation, a few days ago, we met, Amorcia and Pat and I, to talk about what we were going to do. And at that time, I suggested that Pat present before me. And it was a huge mistake. I would never do that because it is really tough to follow Pat. I hope that in the theme of diversity, we'll think about diverse presentation styles and bear with me because there's just no way I can follow that. So I am here today to talk to you about assessing effectiveness. And I'm not going to go over this slide at all because I think in the morning presentations they did a great job of justifying the existence of diversity programs. I'm talking about how the inequities that exist today and some of the changes in terms of the demographics in this country. So I'm just going to go to the last bullet and say there are lots of pipeline programs out there. And in fact, we are trying to pin down the exact number, which is a very hard exercise. You wouldn't think so, but we know that most of the 141 accredited medical colleges sponsor or host a pipeline program today. In 1991, it was 50%. There was a survey done by WAMC. And they don't have the data now, but they think it's most of them, if not all, due to accreditation requirements. But I read those accreditation requirements, and I do think there's a backdoor exit there away from pipeline programs, so I don't know, but it should be most of them. We do know from ADEA that 83% of the 65 dental schools have such a program. So we've been doing a literature review, and that we have found that there are lots of evaluations out there, and I think that we heard this morning two really interesting presentations that show the power of qualitative methods. We also heard during lunch about outcomes, and that's actually also very powerful, and we can learn a lot from evaluations that focus on measuring outcomes over time, or that focus on benchmarking to a general population, say the US population. But when we want to make a causal statement, we want to know, would this have happened if my programs had not been in place? Did this happen because of my program? If we want to say things like that, we need more rigorous methods. Benchmarking and outcomes don't answer those questions. So we have started a literature review because we've written a paper based on the study that I'm about to present. We just finished this study. This is the first presentation outside of the grantee community. And we want to include a lit review to place it in the national context and to acknowledge other work. And we have come up pretty empty-handed. HHS did a literature review in 2009, and their lit review includes only one rigorous study, up to 2009. Our updates, we've only come up with one more. And interestingly, one of these two studies is of a prior evaluation of SMDEP, which is what I'm going to be talking about. So why, if there was a prior evaluation and it was rigorous, why are we doing one? We know a lot about SMDEP. SMDEP does outcomes evaluation regularly. They follow their progress all the time through the National Program Office, which is WAMC and ADEA manage the program. And the prior evaluation looked at students that had applied to medical school, and they wanted to see whether they had been admitted. So the reason for doing our evaluation was that that's the key outcome of the SMDEP program, is whether you apply. So it was a rigorous evaluation, but it was conditional already on observing the first key outcome, which was that the student go and apply. So we said we're going to go back to the program and we're going to see whether they apply. That's the first. First we're going to see if they graduate from college, and then whether they apply. The other thing the foundation really wanted was to find out what were the key ingredients, almost if we could come up with a recipe. You need 20% of this and 30% of that. And I'll tell you about what that is. And that was really to inform other pipeline programs that are out there. So we did a mixed method study. Since I don't have time, you can ask me during Q&A, I'd be happy to talk. It was a mixed method study. I'm only going to show you the impacts, but we did a lot of qualitative work for this study as well. So the key research questions we needed to answer was, one, what is the impact of the program? And then the foundation also wanted to know, do those impacts vary by some student characteristics? And the reason why is that the program does target students by characteristics, and they wanted to know. So for example, do students that come from a 2-year college perform as well as those coming from a 4-year college? Or do outcomes by gender vary, etc.? And so we studied that. And then we looked at the key components. And the second question is not really an additional question, is how we operationalize the first one, because to identify the key ingredients, we did subgroup analyses by different characteristics. So I'll be presenting that today. So what is SMDEP? Many of you know it. I think there's several graduates here. Show of hands. Yeah, we have 2 graduates of SMDEP. SMDEP is a free 6-week residential science enrichment program. It's been sponsored by the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation. It was put in place in '87. Its first cohort began in '89, and it has served 22,000 students and spent $70 million since it started. So it's really big. It's probably the largest. We don't know this, but we suspect it's the largest pipeline program. Every year, it serves about 1,000 students through 12 universities that offer the program. And these are rising sophomores and rising juniors. The program over the past 25 years has evolved. At one point, it included all college students plus students that had graduated. And then policies changed. So the program, as we evaluated it, is only for rising sophomores and rising juniors. The short-term goal is that students stay on track to attend medical or dental school, and that they apply. The long-term goal is to diversify the health professions. And just very briefly, and I'll be happy to talk more about this, what the program offers really resonates with what we heard this morning in the presentations, because it has academic content, but it also has exposure to the health professions through clinical experiences and through different activities. It also has a lot of career prep. So career planning, writing workshops, communication skills, learning how to interview, how to prepare an application, financial education to figure out how to pay for medical or dental school study skills. They also have another component within this sort of general exposure, which is exposure to mentors and to individuals that are very inspiring, so that you can see that you too can make it, that there are instances, even though you may not have seen folks around you that have become doctors or dentists, even if you're the first generation in your family to go to college, to see that others have made it. So these are just to give you a snapshot of the 12 universities that offer the program. It's a wide range of universities. So when we thought about how to evaluate the impact of SMDEP, the foundation wanted a causal statement. They wanted to know that it was because they participated in SMDEP that they applied to medical school, for example. So we looked and we said, well, we could do an experimental design, but an experimental design requires that you be oversubscribed. In other words, a lot more applicants than participants, which is actually true of SMDEP. You can do an experimental design with SMDEP. They have that many applicants. The problem was that these are rising sophomores and juniors. We needed to give them 3 to 4 years, if not more, to graduate and to prepare and apply to medical school. And the foundation didn't want to wait that long. So we did what we felt was the second best. It was experimental design, but retrospective. We took the 2006 to 2008 cohorts that had had already several years for outcomes to occur, for them to graduate from college and then go and apply. We considered doing a very rigorous design, which is called a regression discontinuity design, but that requires a cutoff. You need very clear criteria. Every applicant is assessed against that criteria, and then you come up with a score. You know pipeline programs. That's not how decisions are made. So out of the 12 sites, only 2 had a rubric and gave each applicant a score. The other 10 did not, because they wanted to use other factors. One of my favorite was distance traveled. In other words, how many things that this person had to overcome to make it to where they were today. And so we used propensity score matching, which is basically a technique to find applicants that look like the participants, but did not participate. And you can see here in this graph, I needed some pictures. I don't have any fish, but I'm going to look for some for next time. They could be swimming in here. You can see the blue bar. The orange are the students that are interested in dental school. The red are the applicants that are interested in medical school. And the blue are the applicants that are interested in either one but did not get into the program. So you can see there's a lot of demand for this program. So let me show you the results. We found that SMDEP has a positive impact on medical and dental school applications. This was what the prior study did not measure, but took as their starting point. This means that the likelihood of applying is 8.2% higher among participants and non-participants. So this is the difference between the two groups. However, we had students applying to both medical and dental school. So when we disaggregate outcomes, we find that the finding is driven by dental school applications. There is no impact overall on medical school applications by the SMDEP program. There is a large impact in dental school. Now, we were shocked by this, as was the foundation, as was the NPO. So the NPO is AAMC and ADEA, and they manage this program. So we looked at the output together. We scratched our heads together quite a bit. And you can see here what happens when you disaggregate the analysis by type of site. And this resonates with some of the comments that Pat was making earlier. When you look, there are two types of sites in SMDEP. Some sites are medical-only sites. What this means is only the medical school is participating in SMDEP, and they look for students interested in medicine. These sites have a positive impact on medical school applications. We replicated this for matriculation. So we wanted to measure application and admission, but we don't have admissions data. What we have is matriculation. We know from ADEA and AAMC where they matriculated, and so we measure, and it's really the same pattern that you see here, just slightly smaller because some students applied and then decided not to go. We also looked at whether these findings vary by student characteristics, and this was very important from an implementation standpoint because I didn't talk about how the program makes decisions, but some sites do choose, have different sort of philosophies as to who they want to serve. Some want really high achieving minorities, for example, because they think that they have a higher likelihood of getting into medical school. Some want low achieving minorities because they want to expand the pool. And some want a mix because they think that they can help each other. They're trying to form a community. Some are trying to target two-year college students and some are not. We found absolutely no differences in terms of impacts. And then we looked at the key components of the program. And we found, and this is where the qualitative work became very important. We learned a lot about how the program is implemented, and I think this is probably what's going to be most helpful for other programs. Because we learned quite a bit. We learned that the sites, for example, use ability grouping, some of them. So there are 12 programs. Some of them use ability grouping, so they track students to different courses or levels, and some don't. Some are much more academically oriented than others, and some are much more interactive in their pedagogical styles. So we actually constructed measures of all of these things, and we tested them, and we found that it doesn't matter how you do it. It was all equally effective. I think that the bottom line is that this is not the essence of the program. We also found clinical experience is actually a huge component of the program. I gave you the sort of the three bundles. One was academic, the other is the clinical experiences. And you can see they offer, different sites offer different levels of exposure to these academic experiences. And the students want more. We talked to the students. And the students love them and they want more. So the question the program had, this was more of an NPO question than a foundation question. It was, really, should we give more? Should we spend more than 5% of the time? And the answer is no. We found that sites that offer less exposure have greater impacts. So both of them are effective, but giving more time to clinical didn't necessarily yield better outcomes. We also found, and I'm not going to read through this, but we also found that they had different approaches to recruit instructional staff. So who teaches SMDEP? They're teaching physics, biology, chemistry, some physiology, anatomy, statistics. And we found different kinds of arrangements to recruit instructional staff. Remember, this happens during the summer. That's when a lot of faculty are doing their own research, so you're competing. But we found that that was not the key. It wasn't who was teaching, but it was whether they're coming back year after year. In other words, the key difference was, do you have a core group of faculty, whether they're your own or whether they come from a neighboring college or whether they're grad students. Do you have a core group that is committed to the program and that knows the content that is supposed to be delivered and comes back every year? Or do you have to recruit new faculty every year? That, we found, had an adverse effect on impacts that we measure on medical school outcomes. So clearly, having the stability that comes with a core group of faculty dedicated to the program made a difference. And then the last thing that I want to show you has to do with kind of the leadership structure of the program. We were very curious because we noticed as we were doing interviews and visiting the sites that there were different leadership structures. At some, it was one person, or I was either the dental school or the medical school that was in charge of the program. In some of them, it was very much a collaboration. And we wondered, my own bias at the time was that, whoa, a collaborative structure seems wonderful. When we tested this, we found that that was not the case. And I can speculate, I can tell you why I think it might not be, but it is speculation, I have to say. But sites that were primarily led by only one program had better dental school outcomes. This only applies to the ones that offer dental, because the collaboration came with the introduction of dental into what used to be just a medical program. So then you've got two schools collaborating. It's having one lead that made a difference. And then the other thing that we tested was whether having the PI be in a leadership position made a difference. And the answer was no. And then when we visited, we realized why, which should have been obvious from the beginning, but it's because you don't have to necessarily have a big title, you just have to know how to get things done within your own institution. That's what mattered. It was having that person that knew how to convince the housing folks to give them the space for housing in the summer rather than to the sports clubs that were coming in that summer. It's knowing how to broker those relationships and how to make things happen within your institution. That's what really mattered. So what are the implications? The implications from this study is that the program works, but implementation really matters. That having a core group of faculty is really important. And this is not an easy task because many of them are not paying the faculty, so they're doing this for free and in the summer, and it's a pretty heavy investment. Also, leadership matters in deciding how and whether to work collaboratively. And to me, this is the pulling of the cart effect, at least in the work that I do. We always, when we're going to write a proposal or somebody has to write a report or a paper, well, who is going to be responsible to make sure that it happens? And sort of that's kind of how I think about it. Who's pulling the cart? And that may be the effect that we're seeing. And that more is not better when deciding to allocate time to clinical experiences. They are getting a significant amount of time, and more might not necessarily improve outcomes, but it does make it more fun for the students. We sort of concluded that SMDEP does help diversify professional schools, but with a big caveat. It was the sites that were offering only the medical SMDEP program that had an impact on medical school application and matriculations. And the sites that were offering both had an impact on dental, but no impact on medical. So the question is, why? Why does SMDEP seem to have a positive impact on medical school outcomes at some sites, but not at others? And we don't yet have an answer for that one. And the other question is sort of looking at other outcomes that we did not measure. If you think about what some of the justifications for diversifying the workforce is that, in addition to all of the things that have been mentioned already, is that minority and disadvantaged physicians and dentists are believed to be more interested and dedicated to providing services to similar populations, to the populations from which they come. And so if you think about low-income populations, rural populations, and the question we have is, well, do we see that that is happening? Do we have measures? We know, we think that we know, but we didn't have time in this study to collect these data, but I think that that would be the next step. We talked about this with the grantees to see whether they had data, and one of the grantees, the University of Seattle, the University of Washington in Seattle, actually tracked all of their SMDEP graduates and found that the majority of them were in primary care family practice. So to us that was very reassuring because they were not in other fields that are not quite as associated with providing care for disadvantaged populations or populations that are underserved right now. But I think that that would kind of be the next step for this. So I think that's it. Thank you very much.